Today, we are going to be talking about the Warner Brothers deal, which may or may not be finalized. We're going to dive into what it means for the broader economy and how it can affect high income earners. Stay tuned. This is The Will Whiten Show. So first off, thank you for watching. Take a second, go ahead, hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. It makes a big difference for the YouTube algorithm. I really appreciate it. So let's get into the top news of the day. After a bit of a prolonged bidding war, Warner Brothers Discovery has agreed to be sold to Netflix. Yes, the Netflix behemoth for about $86 billion. This brings together the HBO Max assets into Netflix's realm. So it gives Netflix control of a huge media library, including popular shows like The Sopranos. Now, there's also been a hostile takeover bid from Paramount Skydance. They, I believe, initiated the bidding for Warner Brothers to begin with, and they ultimately did not win the bid. That was not what was approved by the Warner Brothers Discovery Board. However, they are now going direct to the shareholders to try and kind of swoop in and take this deal out from under Netflix, and they're actually bidding an even higher amount, I believe, to the tune of over $100 billion. So we'll see where exactly the HBO and rest of the Warner Brother assets end up. This, of course, was mainly for the streaming assets. However, I believe Paramount Skydance has determined that they would also like to keep the legacy TV network channels like TNT that air on your traditional cable networks. In the Netflix deal, they're actually looking to spin that off. Now, none of this is going to happen tomorrow. None of these, the impacts of this, I should say, are going to happen tomorrow. I believe this won't be finalized until 2027. So it's going to take a long time, no matter how this shakes out, to be finalized. But there's going to be some impacts when it comes to the broader economy. President Trump was asked about it, and he said that he said something to the effect that it could be a problem or it might be an issue. I think I'm not reading too much into that. I think that he's just throwing that out there to basically hedge his bets and not come down hard on the issue on either side, and has to wait to see how it pans out, because it's still not entirely clear. We thought there was a deal done over the weekend, but of course, with Paramount Skydance still trying to be in the mix, it's not truly finalized. And of course, this always brings concern over antitrust issues. And so high level, antitrust is oftentimes hard to define or peg down in terms of a percentage. I don't believe there's an actual percentage to say, well, a certain industry can't occupy or have more than X percent of a certain type of sales in an industry, and if it does cross that threshold, then it's an antitrust issue and we have to break up that company or something like that. So it can be vague, and it's often a very litigious process, and it begs a question as to whether this should be allowed. And so I take the approach to be a little bit more hands-off. I think the government is very bad at picking winners or losers, and then oftentimes if they are going to pick a winner, it could be because there's significant government ties or government official ties to a particular winner. That's just how I think it will happen sometimes. But so I think they're particularly bad at picking winners or losers, and it's no surprise why, because just take, for example, stock pickers. Most people are awful stock pickers. Most people cannot pick whether a company is going to be a success or not. And when you're asking government officials to try and regulate how big companies get or how much power they have over different industries, you're effectively asking them to be stock pickers. You're asking them to determine this company is so powerful, and we believe that it will be so powerful forever, and it's going to crush consumers, and it's going to jack up prices. And so therefore we have to step in because they're playing the stock picker's role and saying this company will be far too successful and then also bring harm to the consumers. So then we must break it up. And I just don't see the evidence of them successfully doing that. I know this was going back maybe 2 years when Mark Zuckerberg was testifying at one point about his acquisition of Instagram. And he was being threatened more or less that, well, you took on Instagram, you're getting too big, and now you're rebranding as Meta, and you're trying to hide and change your name and whatnot. And but the government officials don't take into account that Instagram was not a guaranteed success, right? I believe it was a $1 billion acquisition at the time. It had only been around for like 18 months. It's just a risk and involves a level of understanding in the technology space that government officials just don't have. They're just not involved in it. And they're kind of just looking back with their 2020 hindsight and saying, well, this should have been stopped because look at how successful and powerful you've become. But there was no way to, back then, if you actually put themselves in the shoes of Mark Zuckerberg or the acquisition team or the Instagram founders at the time and say, this is going to become a behemoth, right? You just didn't know. Obviously, Facebook thought it was going to be a behemoth. They thought they could make it very big, but that's not guaranteed. Companies all the time have big plans about how they want to be huge and how if they acquire this company or that company and everything will go great. There's plenty of stories of companies that acquire other companies and it ends up being an absolute failure and they end up having to spin off the assets at a complete loss. Who's to say that Instagram wouldn't have been that case? And so I think oftentimes politicians will look back and say, oh, well, this acquisition should have been stopped and we didn't stop it then. And look at how big it got. There's plenty of acquisitions they didn't stop that went nowhere. And I think they don't have that stock picker's ability to determine who will or who will not be successful. So that's to bring it back to the news of the day. I don't think that it's guaranteed that this Netflix, assuming this goes through, Netflix and Warner Brothers Discovery, just the streaming assets, will be a wonderful success. In fact, Warner Brothers Discovery has had a very rough 5 years. They've had multiple rebrands of HBO Max, and obviously HBO, a very legacy, strong brand name. And at one point they dropped that and they said it'll just be Max, and then they brought the HBO name back, and there was just constant rebranding, and there were struggles getting users at first, and they were changing the model whether you have ads or don't have ads, and Netflix themselves introduced that model. There's just so many variables involved. So I'd prefer to take the less heavy-handed approach and not have the government pick the winners and losers. I think they're bad at that because I think most people are bad at that, and the government is made up of other people. And so I think they're bad at picking winners and losers. I think they're better, or their purpose is better served by creating the rules of the game, not trying to pick the winners and losers of the game. So ultimately, there's not a ton we can do. We'll see how the deal closes. We'll see what Netflix decides to do with these assets in the future. We'll see what the government decides to do in terms of regulating it or perhaps trying to stop it or let it go through. Who knows? But when it comes down to how this can affect high earners, now really this will just affect your day-to-day streaming needs. And frankly, if you are working a ton, because being a high earner often requires a lot of work, a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that. They'll see someone or they'll hear someone's making $500,000 or $1 million. Now we're talking about very high income earners, or tens of millions of dollars. And a lot of these people work a lot. If you were to look at their day to day, they may not see their families a ton. If you look at the typical day of a CEO, it is brutal. I mean, a lot of them are on the road a lot. They're talking to high value customers. They're traveling. I'm talking about, if they have a large, national or even a regional company, they're trying to meet with different local officials and government officials to ensure that there's smooth relations between their company and governments, between their company and customers, between their company and vendors. And then they're trying to set a vision inside a company, right? these people work a ton and they're compensated for it. And so when you're a high income earner or one of these extremely high income earners, the truth is you may not be watching a lot of Netflix. You may not be watching a lot of HBO Max. And so this may not really affect many high income earners too much, because at the end of the day, they will probably have subscriptions to streaming services and they've all started to run together. And the fact that some of them are starting to consolidate may just mean instead of paying two subscription services to get, certain types of content in two places, you may just pay one bigger fee in one place where content is bundled. So I don't think it's a huge impact. And I think that this is also a reason that we could stress the importance of owning your own media, having access to your own media. And that's whether that's through DVDs, or if you're talking about music, it'd be CDs or records. Having physical copies, I think it caught a lot of attention in the last couple years, when a lot of these streaming services will let you buy a digital copy of a movie. And then it turns out they won't support it. Or Amazon had cases where they allowed you to buy books, but then they didn't support those books anymore. So you've bought something that you thought you owned, but then the company just didn't support it anymore, and you lose access to it. Or the only way you can maintain access is that you also maintain an internet connection, which is to say that you're also paying a fee to have the internet in order to hold on to the thing that you bought, the digital asset that you bought. And so if you do actually have time to enjoy streaming services or media, I'd say one thing that you can do to prevent being swept up into which service you're paying for is, one, just try and limit which services you do pay for. Just find the one that has most of what you like and use that one. Or just start to lean into physical media a bit more so that you own it. If there's something that you really like or really like to rewatch, just get it for yourself, and then you don't have to worry if it's on a certain streaming service, or if that service discontinues it, or if the service loses the license to that material, or if it merges with another company. You can kind of step back from all of the madness in those cases when you just own it yourself, and then you just have the access to whatever DVD it is to play it whenever you actually want to. And I think that there's a certain level of freedom to that. And it could be cheaper in the long run because there's a lot of cheap DVDs. I think they're starting to get a bit more expensive because some people are catching on to this. I don't know how long that's going to last, but it could be cheaper in the long run just to pay $1 at a thrift store, or even online, pay a few bucks to have an old DVD sent to you if there's something that you really want to see multiple times or have access to. So that's how I'd look at it. So from a government perspective, I think a more hands-off approach would be better, because we don't really know who's going to be the winners and the losers in the long run. And when it comes to your personal life, chances are you're probably working a lot. You don't have a lot of time to watch things or to pay attention to what movie is on what service. And if you really do care about a few, then maybe it's just best to avoid the streaming services altogether and get a physical media copy of whatever movie or show it is. And that is how I would approach this. Everyone, have a good night.